My favorite thing about people like Hutch says, the U.S. Supreme Court made one of its worst decisions today by taking the abortion right from American women. So sad. Give me one reason why we should vote in the next U.S. election. Chat, the reason why people say stuff like this is because Democrats have power now, and the Supreme Court is radically taking it. If the Democrats don't act now, the political probability is that they will be out of power. And then the true anti-democratic decisions can come down with no lawful response possible by the Democrats. The very elections he's telling you to vote in are being undermined. Half of your OG chatters, and myself included, were blocked by him. Yeah, he would have blocked me by now if I wasn't a streamer. Chat, like, come on, like, we know, we understand it. We know. Saying just vote means that we don't have to do anything new. We don't have to face the facts that we're entering a new period. Before we get into this video, I have a Twitter thread that I wanted to show you because it's very concisely points into what just happened in the Supreme Court. And it's really bad. Today marks the end of what is surely one of the worst terms in SCOTUS history. Guns and prayer and abortion got most of the attention. That's not all the court did. Here are just some of the court's bad decisions. Riva's SCOTUS reversed lower court to give a cop qualified immunity for using excessive force. Taniqua versus Bond. SCOTUS reversed the lower court to give a cop qualified immunity for killing a man. Shope versus Tuford. SCOTUS made it harder to get habeas relief. Habeas corpus is a writ that you can seek. It means literally in Latin, show me the body. If you're ever in the government's custody, you could go to court and your attorneys can file a habeas writ, a writ of habeas corpus, and the judge will go to the government and say, why are you holding this person? Brown versus Davenport. SCOTUS made it harder to get habeas relief. Usually these habeas decisions are related to death penalty cases where there is proof of absolute innocence. So one of the times you'll get a federal habeas corpus case is, say, for example, you were driving through Mississippi, chat, and you pull over for gas at a small town, and the local sheriff, who's also the local president of the Klan, arrests you and charges you with a trumped up crime, say murder. They decide they're going to print a murder on you. You get convicted in the local Alabama rural courthouse of murder. They sentence you to death based on no evidence. You lose your appeal at Alabama courts, which could definitely happen, right? 2 years into death row, you find absolute evidence, video proof that you were not in that town. You were 1,000 miles to the west at the time of the murder. The SCOTUS has said that absolute innocence is not good enough for you to go to federal court and say, hey, I'm absolutely innocent of this crime. The conservative Supreme Court just said that absolute innocence isn't enough as long as you went through the process, and that courts should not be burdened with proof of absolute innocence. If you think I'm memeing or lying or exaggerating, here's an example. The Supreme Court just said evidence of innocence is not enough. Innocence isn't enough here, Arizona tells SCOTUS. Christopher Dunn has spent more than 30 years in prison for a murder he and others say he didn't commit. The state of Missouri says he must stay there because he wasn't sentenced to death. That's what we're talking about. Zebediah, SCOTUS allowed the government to withhold information about torture at CIA black sites. Again, torture is illegal under the U.S. law and treaties the United States has ratified. So that's actually a felony for an American official to commit torture, is against both law and policy. But somehow the SCOTUS determined that our laws are subservient to the CIA. That's evidence of innocence. I'll give you an example of evidence of innocence. Somebody says a woman gets knocked out and raped. The cops arrest you and say you raped her. She has semen in her body from the rapist. The semen in her body does not match your semen. You also have video evidence of you on stream playing a video game the entire night that the rape is said to have occurred. So you have proof of innocence in the sense of you have an airtight alibi and the DNA evidence excludes you. That's evidence of innocence. The Supreme Court says That is not enough. Oh, I see. I mean, that's showing reasonable doubt. What if the DNA technique that didn't exist yet when you were convicted? What if nobody found the video until after you were convicted? So at trial, that evidence wasn't available, but it's later discovered, proving your innocence. Now, obviously, everyone who's not insane thinks that we should be able to look at that, which is what the liberal judges thought. But they're in the minority. Psychotic fascists are in power. That's what the habeas relief is. That's what the habeas corpus is. You go to the federal courts and say, I was wrongfully convicted in state court, and they're going to kill me. Here's the evidence that I'm innocent. In the past, federal courts would look at that and go, it is unconstitutional to kill an innocent man. That's cruel and unusual punishment. Now they're saying they shouldn't do that. They can't do that. SCOTUS denied Social Security, or made it harder. They didn't make it completely impossible, but they made it harder. SCOTUS denied Social Security benefits to residents of Puerto Rico. SCOTUS disallowed recovery for emotional distress damages in civil rights lawsuits. SCOTUS stripped federal courts of jurisdiction to review fact issues in immigration proceedings. This one is insane. Basically, this is insane. The same time the EPA is being stripped of its ability to regulate carbon emissions, SCOTUS determined that the federal courts had no jurisdiction over the administrative law judges of immigration court. So immigration court, which is made up, which is immigration law, or is administrative law, not an actual court. They're saying that real courts can't review administrative law courts in immigration issues. That's at the same time they're saying you can't regulate carbon based on Clean Air Act. SCOTUS blocked the federal vaccine mandate. SCOTUS denied long detained immigrants access to a bond hearing. That's insane. SCOTUS struck down campaign finance restrictions to enable Ted Cruz to pay himself back for loans he made to his own campaign. SCOTUS further limited a person's ability to sue federal officers. SCOTUS weakened enforcement of Miranda rights. SCOTUS undermined the Establishment Clause, forcing states to fund private religious schools against their will. SCOTUS said that a state can't say, we don't want to fund private religious schools with federal taxpayer money. They said, you have to. If you give any money to a school, you have to give it to a religious school. They took away the legislature's power to determine their own tax dollars. This is fucking insane, dude. SCOTUS undermined this was in Maine, in case you're wondering. Maine had a law that would give money to some charter schools and some private schools for students, but it said in the law, but no money for any religious school. And the Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional to discriminate against religious schools. SCOTUS undermined the Establishment Clause, allowing football coach to have publicized Christian prayers at football games, where it's important to remember that the coach made players pray at a public school, and Jewish students objected and said, I shouldn't have to pray to a Christian God to play football. And they said, and he got fired, and they said you couldn't fire him for making Jews pray to Christian God.
Let's go.
Moving on. SCOTUS recognized tribal sovereignty just enough to allow an Indian defendant to be prosecuted twice for the same crime.
Hello.
SCOTUS undermined tribal sovereignty by making tribal land part of the state, allowing the state to exercise jurisdiction on tribal land. SCOTUS struck down New York's 10-year-old restriction on 100-year-old restriction on concealed carry to expand the Second Amendment. SCOTUS allowed Texas's bounty hunter anti-abortion law to go into effect. That law said that you could, if you found out somebody had an abortion or somebody helped someone else get an abortion, you can sue them for $10,000 and all the people that helped. So if you find out somebody got an abortion in Texas, you can sue them for $10,000, even if you don't live in Texas. SCOTUS overruled Roe and Casey, eliminating the federal right to abortion and enabling severe life-threatening restrictions on abortion to go into effect. West Virginia versus EPA. SCOTUS undermined the EPA's ability to regulate emissions and fight global warming. And it must be noted that this isn't everything. SCOTUS also did things on the shadow docket, like allow Louisiana's racial gerrymander to stay in effect for the 2022 election. It's I mean, I don't know what to say, man. I don't know what to say. People are not able to understand what a radical right-wing court means. We've had a moderate conservative Supreme Court since 1969. We now have a fascist Supreme Court.
Nobody reads that and
people are not dealing with it. They haven't mentally understood it yet. McConnell calls Biden's comments on SCOTUS dangerous. Attacking a core American institution like the Supreme Court for the world stage is below the dignity of the president. If McConnell tells you not to do something, you do it. The Supreme Court can't overrule amendments, but they can interpret the language of the amendment. The Supreme Court is the constitutional court, so they are the court that determines how amendments are understood. So, a truly radical Supreme Court could do all sorts of things.
Inspiration
Was the
or
Emancipation
guidance.
Proclamation anything more than an executive order? No, it was just an executive order. And Abraham Lincoln was knowingly ignoring the Supreme Court when he did it. He even talked about how he ignores the Supreme Court. I can find a quote from Abraham Lincoln. Here, let me see if I can find it. I do not forget the position assumed by some that constitutional questions are to be decided by the Supreme Court. Nor do I deny that such decisions must be binding in any case upon the parties to a suit as to the object of that suit, while they are also entitled to very high respect and consideration in all parallel cases by all other departments of the government. And while it is obviously possible that such decisions may be erroneous in any given case, still the evil effect following it, being limited to that particular case, will be with the chance that it may be overruled and never become a precedent for other cases, can be better be borne than could the evils of a different practice. At the same time, the candid citizen must confess that if the policy of the government upon vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by the decisions of the Supreme Court, the instance they are made in ordinary litigation between parties and personal actions, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers, having to that extent practically resigned their government into the hands of that eminent tribunal. Nor is there, in this view, any assault upon the court of the judges. It is a duty from which they may not shrink to decide cases properly before them. And it is no fault of theirs if others seek to turn their decisions to political purposes. So literally, Abraham Lincoln says we shouldn't let the Supreme Court rule over us.
The court, even though it claims it's not political, is of course deeply political. And the court, not just as the individual personalities, but the American institutions from, the court to the legislative branch, they are reactive to the movement in terms of the defining nature of people when people come together as such a power and such a force.
What does it take to impeach or remove a Supreme Court justice? The answer is you need to have articles of impeachment passed by a majority of the House that goes to the Senate for an impeachment trial that requires 2/3 of the votes for a conviction. So you would need 67 votes in the Senate to remove a judge, to convict a judge. It's only happened a handful of times in history, and usually it's for like being caught taking duffel bags of cash. The only way a Supreme Court judge leaves is they're like the Pope. They retire from their own initiative or they die. Impeachment for all practical purposes is impossible.
Well, even if we talk about this as like, what is the law? I mean, the law that Alito is citing as like the ground on which this stands, right, is he's citing cases from like 1602 and the 1700s. And, Matthew Hale, who was this extraordinary misogynist who believed that men had the right to beat their wives because, of course, women were property. And when the court is talking about, it makes this argument that there is no right for women to have access to abortion as health care under the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause because the restrictions on abortion, in their view, are not restrictions that are based on basically an effort to repress women. That it's like a neutral restriction on abortion, like that's it. Instead of recognizing, as of course the court is not going to recognize, but as we all recognize, that this is an outgrowth of patriarchy and an effort to suppress humanity, and a large portion of humanity that has gone on for hundreds and hundreds of years. But that's actually what's in this opinion. It's like, have the Taliban write your opinion.
Jesus Christ.
Well, the court's view is
that lower third
is that restrictions on abortion are not a sex-based classification, right? So it's not subject to what's called heightened scrutiny. And that's actually the position that they're taking. So they dismiss out of hand any 14th Amendment equal protection claim. And then the question becomes the 14th Amendment due process claims, which is what they have overridden today, that there's any grounding there that allows women to control their lives and other people.
Regulations on pregnancy are not related to your sex. Ridiculous.
Pregnant to be able to control their lives. But we understand that even where this affects the LGBTQ community, that the repression of women and the repression of the LGBTQ community is grounded in patriarchy and a demand that people are controlled and fit into patriarchal roles. I mean, if a woman chooses that she wants to be pregnant, that she wants to proceed with gestation, this is still a huge.
Obviously, chat, we understand. We're talking about people that are assigned female at birth, the gender. We're talking about the phenomenon of having a uterus. All right, we're talking about uterus havers. It's not transphobic to say women in that context. As long as you're not intentionally trying to be exclusive of trans people, you're not being transphobic if you say women's issues. I think that's like a very weird, very niche online like perspective. Obviously being inclusive is important, and trans people, trans men can get pregnant. We all understand that. It's not, no one's being exclusive here of trans people. And I think it's just like weird, and you're not making yourself understood, saying, well, actually on that. I mean, obviously I know that. Like, come on. Sex-based rights is a transphobic dog whistle. No, it's not. No. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about specifically the biological reality of having a uterus. That's all. That's it. And trying to control people that have uteruses. There's no exclusivity there. And you're confusing yourself if you think that there's any kind of transphobia there. No, it's an issue surrounding uterus havers. If you don't have a uterus, then it's not an issue for you.
Toll on a human body. But of course, for many people, it is a toll.
It's not transphobic to say to have reproduction, you need a sperm and an egg and a uterus. Okay? That's not transphobia. That's just biological reality. I understand when people try to connect gender roles with biology, that's transphobia. That's what we're talking about here. And she also mentioned the LGBT community multiple times, obviously. A uterus haver is exclusionary. It excludes people without uteruses. That's right. Because if you don't have a uterus, then it doesn't apply to you. Forced pregnancy doesn't apply to you if you don't have a uterus. So muterus havers are being discriminated against because of their uterus having status. They're nicer than Hasan. Well, I mean, like, listen, I understand what people are trying to do. You're trying to be inclusive of trans men. You're trying to be inclusive of non-binary people. And of course, we try to be inclusive. We talk about pregnant persons. We talk about this. But also, there's nothing wrong with noting that cis women are the vast majority of people with uteruses, and people using the shorthand women's issues are not being exclusionary to trans people. They're not. Unless they are making a point to make themselves exclusionary, they're just using common parlance. That's all. It's not an exclusion. And I think that you're fucking yourself up if you think that's happening. You're creating phantoms of discrimination that don't exist. Now, if somebody goes out of their way to exclude trans men, or goes out of the way to exclude non-binary people with uteruses, then yeah, they're being transphobic. But when they're discussing abortion rights in particular, there's no transphobia there. Especially when the people are making efforts to use terms like pregnant people, LGBT, like they come on. And this is only to help you be normal in the future when you're talking to people, when you're trying to be persuasive. And there is a certain type of inquisitorial energy that we feel, that new leftists feel, as a way of asserting their authenticity and membership as a leftist, where they're trying to sniff out the conversos of leftism who are not quite up on all the lingo yet, and find that you're not a true leftist or you've got some hidden bigotries, and exclude, and to show your uprightness and your personal goodness by exposing the bad secret transphobia in others. And like, listen, I get it. We're trying to work on ourselves. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. We slip up from time to time. But what's important is the movement. What's important is what are we doing and what are the policies that we're pursuing. And nobody here is pursuing transphobic policies. And nobody on this panel, as far as I've seen, has done anything that merits that kind of criticism. It's not a legitimate criticism. It's a you demonstrating what you believe to be superior knowledge. The virtue signal to all of us that you're more woke. And listen, I want to be woker than you, but let's not waste our time. And, you know, if you want a hyper safe space where everybody's going to take the time all the time to intone all of the right phraseology in a kind of pseudo religious sense, this stream is not probably for you, which is okay. If you think my stream is not inclusive enough, then it's probably not good for you. If that, you should probably go find your safe space. Go make it. But I'm not, I'm just trying to tell you how people communicate, and trying to create some sort of long litany necessary whenever we talk about these issues, it becomes tiresome. Being ostracized over a learning moment. By the way, this is a real safe space. What do I mean by that? People can make good faith mistakes here. People can come here to learn more. People can have they can phrase things incorrectly. It's a learning space, not a safe space. Now, are we inclusive of trans people? Absolutely. Do we try to make it comfortable for people, marginalized groups, to be here? Yes. But this is a learning space. And if you're not, mentally, like if you're having a day where you don't want to be in a learning space, leave. Honestly, I think you should take time for yourself. And that's okay. That's legitimate. But we're not going to make this a bubble wrap room. That's all. Mike's explanation of why that was being made over the top is so much safer and from a friendly POV than many other. I mean, I try to be, listen, I get it that the people that are trying to be inclusive are coming at it from a right. 9 times out of 10 are intending to do it to make everybody more aware of issues they may not be aware of. But, it could be a waste of time. And I've taken a lot of time to talk about it, but I'm just trying to create an understanding between all of us. Is there a link for the VOD? Yeah, you just go to the videos.
I mean, that's ultimately what it is. It defuturizes women. It says that you don't get to go to school. You don't get to live your life. You don't get actually to have those other children that you might have had you not been forced to have children now, but then had children at another point in your life when you were ready to have children, and give them the life that they deserve as well as your own life. It's a complete destruction of a human life to force somebody to be pregnant and carry that pregnancy to term, whether or not that person is, then able to put up for adoption, or whether they're forced to care for the child. It's an extraordinary destruction.
Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap